I turned 67. My son gave me a birthday card with a boat on the front. Inside, he wrote, "To the best dad, here's to the open water." I stood in my kitchen reading it 3 times. Not because the words were beautiful, because something felt off, the way a floorboard feels off. It holds your weight, but, somewhere underneath, something has shifted. My name is Frank Delgado, retired civil engineer, 31 years with the county. My wife, Helen, passed away 4 years ago from pancreatic cancer. We had 11 months between the diagnosis and the end. 11 months is not enough time to say everything. It is not enough time to grieve while the person is still there. It is not enough time to do much of anything except hold someone's hand and watch them go. After she died, my son moved back into the area. He and his wife, Trina, rented a place 20 minutes from me. He said he wanted to be closer. He said he was worried about me being alone. He called every few days. He came over on Sundays and ate whatever I cooked and watched football. And it felt, for a while, like something I hadn't expected, like maybe losing Helen hadn't taken everything. I want you to understand that before I tell you the rest. I want you to understand that I believed in my son. I had no reason not to. The house is the thing. It always comes back to the house. Helen and I bought it in 1989. 34 years I have lived inside those walls, raised my son there, painted every room at least twice, replaced the roof twice, put in a new kitchen in 2011 because Helen had always wanted quartz countertops, and I wanted to give her something she always wanted before it was too late, though I didn't know then that it was already getting late. The house is paid off, worth somewhere around $480,000 now, according to what similar homes on the street have sold for. I'm not rich. My pension from the county is decent. I have Social Security. I have a savings account and a modest brokerage account that I've managed carefully for 20 years. I am comfortable, not extravagant, comfortable. My son knew all of this. I don't know exactly when he started looking at what I had, the way a person looks at something they intend to take, but I know now that it was well before my 67th birthday, well before the card with the boat on the front. It started with conversations that felt like care. "Dad, have you thought about what happens to the house if something happens to you? Dad, you should really have someone you trust with access to your accounts, just in case. Dad, Trina and I were talking. We want to make sure you're protected. I am a civil engineer, or I was. I spent 31 years calculating load-bearing tolerances and stress points. I know when a structure is sound and when it's working too hard to hold something up. Those conversations, they were working too hard. But I was lonely, and he was my son, and I told myself I was being paranoid. He suggested I add him to my checking account, just so someone can step in if there's an emergency, he said. God forbid something happens and your bills don't get paid. I said I'd think about it. He suggested I look at updating my will. He knew a lawyer, he said, a guy he'd worked with on something for his company. Very reasonable rates. I said I'd think about that too. Then, the summer before my birthday, he brought up power of attorney. It's just a document, Dad. It doesn't mean anything changes. It just means that if you ever can't make decisions for yourself, I can step in. It's what responsible families do. I remember looking at him across my kitchen table. The same table where he'd done his homework as a boy. The same table where Helen used to do the crossword puzzle every Sunday morning with her coffee going cold beside her because she always forgot to drink it. I said, "Let me talk to my own attorney first." He smiled. He said, "Of course, Dad, whatever makes you comfortable." But his jaw tightened when he said it. Just slightly. I noticed that. I have an attorney. His name is Phil, and we've known each other for over 20 years. He handled Helen's estate. He's the kind of man who talks slowly and means everything he says. I called Phil the next morning and told him what my son had been asking. Phil was quiet for a moment, then he said, "Frank, I want you to come in. I want to talk through some things with you." I went in on a Thursday. Phil explained what a power of attorney actually means. Full financial POA, the kind my son was suggesting, would give him the ability to sell assets, access accounts, make financial decisions on my behalf, with very little oversight required. It's not a document you give to someone because it's convenient, Phil said. It's a document you give to someone you would trust with your life, literally. I told Phil I wasn't ready to do anything. He said that was the right answer. He also suggested, gently, that I consider setting up a revocable living trust for the house. It would allow me to control everything while I was alive, pass the house clearly and without probate when I died, and, critically, make it much harder for anyone to interfere with the property without my knowledge and consent. We set it up over the next 3 weeks. The house transferred into the trust. I remained the sole trustee. The successor trustee, the person who would take over if I became incapacitated or died, was not my son. It was Phil himself, with instructions to sell the property and divide proceeds between 3 charities Helen had loved. I didn't tell my son. Phil also suggested I contact my bank and set a verbal password on my accounts, a word that would need to be provided in person before any changes could be made. I did that too. And then I waited, because I had a feeling, the kind of feeling a civil engineer gets when the numbers don't add up. Something was coming. I didn't know what shape it would take. It came in November, 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. My son had invited me to spend the weekend at his house. He and Trina had a guest room, and he said Trina was making a big dinner Friday night and they wanted me there. It felt normal. It felt like family. I drove over Friday afternoon. We had dinner. Trina made pot roast. We watched a movie. It was fine. It was pleasant. I went to bed around 10. I woke up at 2 in the morning because I heard voices. My son's house has thin walls. He and Trina were in their room with the door not fully closed, and they were talking in what they thought were quiet voices. I lay still on the guest bed, and I listened. I'm not going to tell you I felt rage. I felt something colder than that. Trina was saying, "What if he just says no? What if he won't sign?" My son said, "He'll sign. He trusts me. That's the whole point." She said, "And then we can sell it?" A pause. "Once we have the POA, yeah, or at least access to the equity. We could do a HELOC, pull maybe 150, 180 out of it. He'd never notice until it was too late." She said, "What about the will?" He said, "I'm working on that. The lawyer I found can help us draft something that makes it look like Dad did it himself." Another pause. Then Trina said, quieter, "And if he gets suspicious?" My son said, "Then we keep him distracted. You're better at that than I am. Keep him talking, keep him at the house with you while I handle what needs to be handled." I lay in that dark guest room for a long time after they went quiet. I thought about Helen. I thought about how she used to say our son had her father's eyes and my stubbornness. I thought about whether she had known something in those 11 months that I had refused to see. Then I took out my phone and I opened the voice memo app. I pressed record and I set the phone on the nightstand facing the wall, just in case they came into the hall and spoke again. They didn't. But I had what I needed. I had heard it myself. That was enough for now. The next morning, I came down to breakfast and I was normal. This is the thing about being 67 and having worked with the public for 31 years. You learn to keep your face neutral when the situation requires it. You learn that showing your hand too early is the fastest way to lose. My son made eggs. Trina poured coffee. We sat at their kitchen table and talked about Thanksgiving plans and whether the Cowboys had any shot this season. And I ate my eggs and drank my coffee, and I did not let a single thing show on my face. After breakfast, my son said casually, so casually, as if it were an afterthought, "Oh, Dad, I had that attorney draw up that POA we talked about. Just a simple one. I thought maybe you could take a look while you're here." I said, "Sure, I'll take a look." He slid a folder across the table. I opened it. I read it slowly, the way I used to read structural plans, looking for what wasn't there as much as what was. It was broad. Sweeping, in fact. Financial and property decisions, effective immediately upon signing. No limitation clause. No automatic expiration. I looked up and said, "I want to have Phil review this before I sign anything. You know how I am." My son's smile didn't move, but something behind it did. He said, "Of course, Dad, take your time." I drove home that afternoon. As soon as I pulled into my driveway, I sat in the car for 10 minutes with my hands on the steering wheel. Then I went inside and called Phil. Phil called a colleague of his, an attorney who specializes in elder law and financial exploitation. Her name was Sandra, and when I played her the voice recording over the phone, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Mr. Al Delgado, I need you to listen carefully and do exactly what I tell you." Over the next 3 weeks, we did the following. I went to my bank in person and removed my son as the emergency contact on my accounts. a designation I hadn't remembered he had from years ago when Helen was sick. I reset everything. The password was now a word only I and the bank manager knew. Phil confirmed that the living trust on the house was airtight. Nothing my son could do would touch that property without my knowledge, and even with knowledge, he had no legal standing to act on it. Sandra advised me to keep the voice recording safely backed up in multiple locations. I emailed it to Phil, to Sandra, and to a cloud storage account my son didn't know existed. She also advised me to do something that felt strange at first. Keep acting normally. Don't confront him yet. Don't tip him off. Let him think the plan is still moving forward while we made sure every door was bolted from the inside. People who do this, Sandra said, they usually go further when they think they're close. Let him go further. I didn't like it, but I understood it. My son called me twice that week. Normal calls. How are you, Dad? Eat anything good lately? The Cowboys are done for the season. It's a shame. I answered normally. I asked about Trina. I mentioned that I'd been thinking about the POA and might have some questions for his attorney. He said, absolutely, Dad, whenever you're ready. The second week of December, he called and asked if he could come by the house, said he had something he wanted to show me. A document, he said, an updated version of the POA that addressed some of the concerns Phil might have. I said, sure, come by Saturday. I called Phil. Phil called Sandra. We agreed this was the moment. Saturday morning, I got up early. I made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table, Helen's crossword puzzle table, and I looked around at the house I had lived in for 34 years. I thought about the quartz countertops. I thought about Helen forgetting her coffee while she did the puzzle. I thought about my son at that same table as a boy, doing math homework and complaining that fractions were pointless. And I thought, this is still my house, and it is going to stay that way. My son arrived at 11. Trina wasn't with him. He came in and hugged me, and I made him a cup of coffee, and we sat down, and he put another folder on the table. I had the language cleaned up. He said, I think you'll find it more straightforward. I opened the folder. I looked at the document. Then I looked up at him. I said, I was awake that night at your house. He blinked. What? 2 a.m. I heard you and Trina talking about the POA, about the house, about pulling equity, about keeping me distracted. The color left his face so fast it was almost remarkable. He opened his mouth and closed it again. He looked down at the table. He looked back up at me. Dad, I recorded it, I said. My attorney has a copy. Sandra Okafor, who specializes in elder financial exploitation, has a copy. My bank has been notified. The house is in a revocable living trust that you have no access to and no claim on. There is nothing here for you to take. He said nothing for a very long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was small, smaller than I'd heard it since he was a boy. Dad, we weren't really going to, don't, I said. I said it quietly. I wasn't angry. I was tired and sad and entirely certain. Don't tell me you weren't really going to. I heard the words. I know what they meant. He sat there. I sat there. The house was very quiet. Outside, a car drove past. Somewhere down the street, a dog was barking. I said, I think you should go. He stood up slowly. He picked up the folder. He walked to the door and stopped with his hand on the frame and looked back at me, and I looked back at him, and I don't know what he saw in my face, but what I saw in his was something I hadn't expected. Not defiance. Not excuses. Just grief. Maybe he had lost something too. Maybe he had understood in that moment exactly what he had traded away and for what. He left without saying anything else. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after. I drank my coffee. I looked at the quartz countertops and the window over the sink where Helen used to watch the Cardinals that came to the feeder in winter. Phil had advised me that I could pursue legal action. Sandra said the recording, combined with the drafted document and the statements from the bank, would be enough to file a complaint with the state's Adult Protective Services Unit and potentially pursue civil charges for attempted financial exploitation of an elderly person, which is a serious matter in this state with real consequences. I haven't decided yet. That decision is still sitting with me, the way certain decisions do. What I have decided is this. The house is staying in the trust. Everything goes to Helen's charities when I'm gone. My son will receive nothing from my estate, not because I hate him, but because you cannot unknow what you know. You cannot unhear what you've heard. And some things, once broken, don't go back together the same way, no matter how much you might wish they did. If you are older and you are watching this and you have family members who have started asking about your finances, your house, your will, I am not telling you to be afraid of your family. Most families are not like this. Most people who ask about your will are asking because they care about you and want to make sure things are in order. But I am telling you, know what you have. Know what a power of attorney actually means before you sign one. Talk to your own attorney, not one that someone else recommends. Set up a living trust if you own property. Put a security flag on your financial accounts. These are not unfriendly things to do. They are simply what it looks like to take care of yourself. My wife used to say, "Frank, you plan for everything except the things that actually surprise you." She was right, of course. She usually was. But I'm a civil engineer. I believe in load-bearing structures. I believe in building things to hold weight. Weight you can predict and weight you can't. What I built in those weeks after that Saturday morning at 2 in the morning when I lay still in a dark guest room and listened to my son's voice through a thin wall, what I built held. That is enough. For now, that is enough. The Cardinals came back to the feeder this week. 2 of them, a bright red male and a brownish female, and I watched them from the kitchen window with my coffee going cold beside me the way Helen's always did. I didn't hurry to drink it. Some habits are worth keeping, even if the person who gave them to you is gone. I've thought a lot about what made everything fall apart for my son, and I don't think it was bad luck. I think it was the oldest, most predictable equation there is. The moment you start treating someone's trust like a resource to be harvested, you've already set the clock running on your own undoing. My son didn't fail because he got caught. He failed because of the kind of person he had quietly become. Somewhere along the way, he had started looking at his father, at me, and seeing a balance sheet. A house with equity, a savings account, an old man who loved him and therefore wouldn't look too closely. That's not a plan. That's a confession. And confessions have a way of finding the surface eventually, whether you intend them to or not. I've been a civil engineer for 31 years. I've learned that most structural failures don't happen all at once. They happen slowly, through small compromises. A corner cut here, a calculation ignored there. Until one day the weight becomes more than what's holding it up can bear. Character works the same way. My son didn't wake up one morning and decide to become someone who would steal from his own father. He got there in steps, small ones, each one easier than the last because the previous one had already moved the line. That's what I want people to understand, not just the legal steps, the trust, the attorney, the bank password, the recording, though those matter. And I'd encourage anyone in a similar situation to take every one of them seriously. What I want people to understand is the deeper thing underneath all of it. Intelligence without integrity is just a more efficient way to cause damage. My son was smart enough to construct a plan. He wasn't wise enough to understand what executing it would cost him. I didn't outsmart my son because I'm cleverer than him. I protected myself because I was paying attention. Because 31 years of engineering taught me that the most important thing you can do when something feels off is not to dismiss the feeling. Measure it. Verify it. Act on what the numbers actually say, not on what you wish they said. Wisdom isn't something you're born with. It's something you build through the hard and sometimes painful work of seeing clearly, seeing people clearly, seeing situations clearly, and most importantly, seeing yourself clearly enough to know when you're being led somewhere you shouldn't go. Helen used to say courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was doing the right thing while afraid. Lying in that dark guest room at 2 in the morning, listening to my son's voice through a thin wall, I was afraid. Afraid of what it meant. Afraid of what it meant. Afraid of what came next. But I pressed record. I called Phil. I did the next right thing and then the next one after that. That's all any of us can do. The next right thing? The Cardinals are back at the feeder. The house is still mine. And I sleep fine.